movement. Then return the throttle to idle. Gently test the brakes and nose wheel steering immediately after your aircraft begins to move forward. Press Z to steer left and X to steer right. Taxi forward and turn right on the taxiway. Okay, now we're on our way. Max taxi speed in F16 is about 30 knots, but be sure to slow down to about 10 knots for turns. Heat may build up quickly if the brakes are used for an extended period, so do not ride the brakes to control taxi speed. Use one firm application of the toe brakes to slow the aircraft if you need to. Keep the throttle to idle and only advance it if you need to speed up. Let's turn left and hold short of the runway. Come to a stop as you approach the runway, and we'll make sure that the aircraft is ready for takeoff. Apply the brakes and hold right here. A series of last-minute checks need to be made just prior to entering the runway. Some airfields have arm, de-arm areas you may be temporarily parked at to keep the aircraft clear of other traffic. You may also perform these checks while parked on the taxiway as we are now. Press spacebar to continue. First, set the probe heat switch to probe heat. This should be done at least 2 minutes prior to takeoff if icing conditions exist. Delay selection of probe heat as long as possible prior to takeoff if icing is not expected to prevent overheat and damage to probe components. Next, verify the alt flap switch is set to normal. Then, just inboard the manual trim panel, check the needles on the trim indicators are centered. This is the final verification the trim settings are correct for takeoff and have not been inadvertently changed. Center them if you need to using the trim knobs or the trim controls on your stick. Press spacebar to continue. Now, verify the engine control switch is set to prime and the guard is down. Verify your speed brakes are closed and the canopy is closed and locked. The yellow handle should be down and the canopy warning light on the right eyebrow should be off. Press spacebar to continue. Set the stores configuration switches required. In general, set Cat 1 for air-to-air loadouts without external wing tanks. Set Cat 3 for air-to-ground loadouts or any loadouts with external wing tanks. We have external fuel tanks with air-to-ground stores loaded, so set it to Cat 3. Press spacebar to continue. Next, we'll verify the external fuel tanks are feeding. Set the fuel quantity select knob to external wing and check the quantity. Wing external tank should feed first and have lower quantity than the engine start, somewhere just below 2,400 pounds. If the centerline external tank were installed, it would feed first and you'd have to check. Last, check that the engine oil pressure is reading normal between 15 and 65 psi and all caution and warning lights are out. Press spacebar to continue. At this point, we're ready to take the runway. Go ahead and taxi out and turn left to line up on the center line. Come to a stop and we'll run a quick lineup check and walk through the takeoff sequence. Okay, roll forward until you're lined up with the runway and hold the brakes. Verify the parking brake is disengaged and the anti-skid switch is set to anti-skid. This will prevent the brakes from locking up and blowing your tires if you need to abort the takeoff and come to a stop quickly. Press spacebar to continue. This is going to go quickly, so I will describe the entire sequence, then we'll run through it step by step. First comes the lineup check. You will keep the brakes held, run the engine up to 90% RPM, and check for normal indications on your engine instruments. You will release the brakes, increase throttle to full, and engage the afterburner. Maintain track down the runway using the rudder pedals as ZNX. You will disengage the nose wheel steering about 70 knots when the rudder becomes effective. As you approach your takeoff speed, about 170 knots in this case, pull gently back on the stick to raise the nose about 10 degrees. You can use the gun cross and the pitch ladder in the HUD as a guide. The aircraft will become airborne and start to climb. Raise the landing gear while still below 300 knots, and then continue to fly the aircraft along the runway heading. If you're ready, let's go ahead and give it a try. I'll talk you through it as we go. Press spacebar to continue. Okay, hold the brakes, W, and advance the throttle to 90% RPM. Check the engine instruments for hydraulic oil pressure warning light off, oil pressure between 25 and 65 psi, F-tip 935 degrees or less, hydraulic A and B pressure between 2850 and 3250 psi. Then release the brakes and advance the throttle to full. Now use gentle rudder inputs Z and X to maintain track down the runway. Disengage nose wheel steering, S. We are approaching takeoff speed. Gently pull back on the stick to raise the nose about 10 degrees. Okay, we are airborne. Raise the landing gear, G. Release a little lift as the turn moves forward. Now by pressing the escape key or continue to fly around.
Warning, 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 altitude, altitude. Pull up, altitude, altitude.